All right, so I recently did my first Chef's Challenge tournament within the Go Format Casual Discord. So I just wanted to go over the tournament and the deck I used and my thoughts, the results, the good and the bad. I'll start out with the good and then go to the bad and then give kind of like an overall summary of just the thoughts I had. So this was the deck I chose, which is just basically a version of another deck that I kind of homebrewed, which is called Rock Fusion. That one has a lot more Earth aggro elements into it, which for the Ceph challenge, you have to have basically non-meta decks. So it was basically considered too meta, too much like Earth aggro to be viable for the tournament. So what I instead did was I ended up replacing a lot of the aggro cards with some more set cards like these Golem Sentries and then the Big Shield Gardenas, and then also stuff like the Morphing Jars and Cyber Jar, and kind of just played a little bit more of a slower pace game with the set monsters. It was kind of fun that I got to play some mind games because I could Rhoda for a Big Shield Gardna, and then either I set the Big Shield Gardna or maybe something like a Morphing Jar or a Golem Sentry instead. And so it would basically put my opponent into a position where they can't kill the Big Shield Gardna with a knock, but if they don't knock, then maybe it's a Golem Sentry or a Morphing Jar. And then if they do want to kill if they do think it's a Big Shield Gardna and don't knock it, well, they have to at least tech it twice because nothing is going to be able to kill it with 2600 defense. So they have to summon two monsters, and then say if they summon two monsters, it ends up being like a Cyber Jar, then they lose out in that situation. Or if it just ends up being something like, they're summoning another 1800 monster and they can't kill the Golem Sentry, then they don't get to knock it because it's face up. And so it's kind of just mind games like that was the idea. And then just Gigantes, I mean, that's an Earth aggro card, but it's also like one of the very few rock monsters that's in Go format that's actually good. So I felt like that was okay adding it in. Like if you look at the deck, like the only cards that are specifically Earth aggro are these three Gigantes, and then you can say the Exiled Force, but that's just a staple. And then I mean these cards as well, but they're DD Warrior Lady and Breaker are both staple cards as well. So I think it was quite enough different from Earth aggro. The deck performed fine. I mean, we got the Metamorphosis and Mega Rock Dragon combo into the King Dragoon over here, which a lot of the decks that I've played against just have a difficulty with King Dragoon. I mean, it's just a difficult card to deal with. It's a 2400 beater that you can't target. Um, when my actual Goat format deck build of this, I mean, that's a really big part of this deck is getting Dragoon out because Chaos Turbo has a really hard time dealing with this because Chaos Sorcerer can't banish it and it's doesn't have the stats to kill it. And then you know you're talking about something like a tribe infecting virus as like their only way to like get rid of it, or using a trap like Mirror Force or Torrential Tribute, because most of the Chaos Turbo's cards target like Regeki Break and things like Night Assailant, Chaos Sorcerer. I mean, BLS can beat over it, but its effect targets, just things like that. So I think the tournament had six participants, so it's not a very big tournament. I went 2-2, so not a great result, not terrible either. Um, you can see the side deck's kind of weird. I had some like kind of like fun cards in it, I guess. So Invader of the Throne Room, like I wanted to kind of just put this in the main deck, but I felt like it just wasn't quite good enough. But like Rhoda for like, because this is a warrior, Rhoda for this, and then set it, and maybe put it behind like Swords of Vain Light, and then get to flip it over. Like it's just a card that doesn't like ever get played, but could like maybe get used in this situation. And then this guy, if someone went like very type heavy, I think I ended up putting in the deck like or adding it into the side from the side deck into the main like once, but never got to use it. And then just like some scapegoats for combination with the Metamorphosis against heavy aggro decks. Probably the biggest underperforming card was the Solemn Judgments. And my actual like Go format deck version of this deck, the Solemn Judgments actually do quite well. So I kept them in for this deck, and then they just very heavily underperformed. I ended up siding them out a lot of times for like the Sakuretsu armors because there was just a lot of like beater heavy card decks that I was going up against, and the Solemn Judgments just weren't really doing much. So that was probably like the biggest underperformer was the three Solemn Judgments that I ended up having side out a lot. So things that I liked about the um, Chef's Challenge, like I said, just kind of getting or being able to use different cards. So Golem Sentry, I mean, that's been used in traditional like competitive Go format decks before. It's not heavily used, but it has been used. Getting to play like the jar cards is a really big one. Cyber Jar is just like one of those cards that it's a cool effect and like you want to be able to use it, but half the decks in competitive format are all Chaos Turbo, and like you just can't pay Cyberjar against those decks because if you flip it over and then your opponent gets to set a Magician of Faith and a Koichi, and then they add BLS to their hand, whatever you get at that point basically just doesn't. You just win the duel for your opponent at that point. Like you give them Magician of Faith, they flip that over, get back Trinity, play Pot of Greed, play Graceful Charity, play Delinquent Duo, whatever. They flip over to Koichi. I mean, it's also a Light in the Dark that's on the field, and then it's going to fuel their chaos, and they got BLS in hand. Like they just got so many options at that point that, if you're getting Golem Sentries set face down or Big Shield Gardener, like you just it doesn't matter. You just won the game for your opponent, so you just can't ever play this card in competitive hardly. I mean, I think the only decks that their deck that does is like burn decks with like Panda Burn, and that's just because they know that they're going to be able to use their burn cards before their opponent can use any of the OP like flip effect or chaos monsters that you just gave them, so they don't care. It's like they're gonna do like 3,000 points of damage, and as soon as you draw your card with like 2 Just Desserts, so they don't care if you get a bunch of good stuff. They're gonna win the duel off of it. But because the Chaos Turbo isn't playable because this is casual, it means that you can play cards like Cyber Jar and Morphing Jar and not have to worry about just auto winning the game for your opponent because half the decks you play against are Chaos Turbo. So that's fun. Um, Getting to play around with just kind of these little niche ideas like the Big Shield Gardna and playing mind games with what I'm setting kind of deal. That was fun. Metamorphosis. I mean, this isn't like completely like only casual because, like I've said, I do have a competitive deck with Mega Rock Dragon as the focus and just kind of rock types and earth types, and being able to get this out to metamorphosis it into King Dragoon, or just summoning it out with like 3 banishes to get a good beater on the board. Some of the other decks I saw were pretty creative too. There was like Plant Chaos, which didn't work out quite as well. There was another deck that focused on banishing cards, and it used I can't remember the name of the card. It was a flip effect monster that I hadn't really seen before. That was Pyro. It was Pyro Fire. It was something that flipped over and it banished the top 3 cards of their deck, and then um, did like 800 burn damage. I think it was like Fire Sorceress Princess right here. I saw it right here. This one, Lady Assailant of Flames. So flip, banish the top 3 cards of your deck, inflict 800 damage to your opponent, and then they were combining this with like Return from the Different Dimension or Dimension Fusion and stuff like Chaos End or something like something where you had to have like 8 banished cards and then destroy all of your opponent's monsters. So that was kind of cool. That deck, he said the deck didn't perform well, but I think you could probably just like mess around with it a little bit and get it to perform better. So that was like the big benefit, I think, was just being able to use different stuff and different cards. And I mean, that's basically why you play in the casual format tournaments and on that Discord, is just to play different stuff and get to experiment and get creative with your deck building, where Chaos Turbo just doesn't, you don't have to worry about Chaos Turbo crushing whatever deck that you bring that's like a little bit different. What I didn't like was the vagueness of the tournament. So for like my side deck, what would have really been beneficial is if I would have been able to add King Tiger Wangoos. But I was worried that if I had, like 3 King Tiger Wangoos in my side deck and then 3 Gigantes in my main deck, that I would be still getting like too close to Earth aggro, along with like Exiled Force. I'm like, that's the 3 Gigantes is already Earth aggro, and then I start adding King Tigers into the side deck. That's like that would I put those in the main deck. That's half my monsters in my main deck already being basically Earth aggro cards. But then during the tournament, I went up against somebody that was playing Giant Rats, Injection Fairy Lily, Exiled Force, and then Berserk Gorillas in their deck, and it's like, okay, well that's half of a Earth aggro deck right there as well. Like, so how much do I need to nerf my deck to not be Earth aggro, but still be competitive, as opposed to like what other people are doing? So I kind of wish it was more just a very clear cut, like these are the cards you can play, these are the cards you can't. Not that I think that this was like the best deck at all, but it was still just like this weird situation with like, okay, well, I picked this deck just because I wanted to play Mega Rock Dragon, but how far do I need to nerf it to make it not Earth aggro, but still be like good enough to be competitive and like win duels? Because I still want to win, obviously, but to still be considered like a casual deck, or not too close to Earth aggro. And then looking at other people's decks, like how much do they have to change it? Where like somebody, the person that was playing like those Lady Assailant of Flames and using like flip banishing and stuff, like that was completely original. Where this is like kind of half original, half Earth aggro. Whereas like that other deck with the Beast down that had the giant rats and berserkerillas, it's like, okay, well, that's pretty close to like just a beast beat down Earth aggro type of deck. So how far different you have to be is the real issue I kind of had with the format. Like I would just very much rather prefer that you would just have like a ban list of like, okay, well, here's the cards that just get played all the time in competitive Go format. Let's just get rid of those and then see what creative decks we can make out of it. I don't know if that would maybe just be too difficult, where like your ban list would just be too long. Where like if you're thinking about like, well, we have to ban Thunder Dragon because every Chaos deck would just use Thunder Dragon, and then probably Magician of Faith as well, and then BLS, and then for Earth aggro you'd have to ban like Gigantes. Maybe you'd have to ban like Scapegoat, because then you could have just like Thousand Eyes or Strict decks all over the place, and then have to ban like Panda or Just Desserts because those are just too common for burn decks, and you get like a ban list that's like 50 cards long. So it might be a little bit difficult in that situation too. But I don't really like the vagueness of the deck building. Like I don't want to. I want to know very clear cut like what I can and can't have, and then there's no situation where after the duel I'm like, if I could, I kind of wish I could have had those cards, and I think it's kind of similar to what I was doing, and so a situation like that, I guess. But overall, it was fun. Very interesting. Like I do like taking part in the casual decks, and like I said, just getting be able to play cards like Morphing Jar and Cyber Jar and stuff like that they never get to play in actual competitive Go format because they're just not viable enough. So that'll be the end for this video.